Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, good afternoon. Allow me first to extend my heartfelt relief that most of the Asian countries have coped very well with the pandemic. And I'm honored to contribute to the Asian Financial Summit and the Asian Financial Think Tank Annual Forum. I've been asked to share some European observations on globalization following the pandemic. I would have loved to join you in person, but travel from Germany is still restricted, but nothing matches a personal exchange. Some see globalization as a cause of the pandemic, not me. I believe globalization is clearly a big part of any potential solution, and that view is widely shared in Germany. Since the 1990s, globalization has lifted hundreds and hundreds of millions from poverty and led the world to a unique prosperity. It has fostered wealth creation, knowledge sharing, technological leapfrog. It carries the seed of an effective and efficient solution to this and any future pandemic. More on this later. Globalization enabled mankind to quadruple our population to almost 8 billion today from only 2 billion 100 years ago. Globalization also enables us to tackle the challenges accompanying these growth. The strain on resources, climate change, the pressure on migration and longevity, to name but a few. Mankind's inventiveness has been always underestimated. Nothing fuels inventiveness more than a connected, globalized world. The talents of great nations combined, motivated not by resentment, but by curiosity. Not everyone shares this view. Not even in my country, that is, like most of Asia, a winner from globalization. As a result, already prior to COVID, globalization is being scrutinized simply because it knows winners and losers. Even though the overall balance is clearly positive, it is tempting to exploit the losing politically. Blaming others on your own shortcomings is as human as can be. The coronavirus outbreak only served as an excuse to allow protectionist instincts to roam freely. Getting the genies back into the bottle will not be an easy feat. And yes, countries that closed borders earlier fared much better in the pandemic's early days. With the virus spreading, more and more countries took emergency measures, such as restricting people's movement, closing of borders. However, these measures, which are clearly an acceptable means in a pandemic and undoubtedly a precondition to successfully restricting its spread, absent a vaccine, were strikingly uncoordinated, even in a supposedly closely coordinated European Union. I didn't see any fruitful attempts to coordinate and harmonize restrictions, to establish the knowns of what helps and how much, which would have enabled each country to allow much less restrictions than we had to do to be safe and efficient. I completely agree, efficiency is a cold metric and cannot be the one and only consideration in a pandemic. But, and this is a big but, we all know resources are scarce. Efficient handling will save lives in the end, because the more efficient we are, the more means remain for what needs to be done on the medical front. It's understandable to strike different national balances between various liberties. But what we saw were international organizations being sidelined, even reproached. The very need for international cooperation has been thrown into question. That costed dearly. we must accept that globalization and our lifestyle have helped spread the virus. But by no means did it cause the pandemic. I maintain that between the first appearances and the weeks before it hit the shores of Europe and the US, valuable time was wasted due to a lack of efficient globalization. By that, I mean early and institutionalized information exchange and early and precise warning. It's painful to admit that there was a certain arrogance in the West that led to a lack of learning from those exposed early on. First and foremost, in an ideal world, the speed of information on an infection should exceed the speed of the spread itself. The solution to this or any other pandemic is a stronger global health information and medical support system. The proof for this is the scientific race to find a vaccine. It has encouraged unprecedented global collaboration. Just a few days ago, we heard great news from BioNTech, a spin-off of my alma mater, Gutenberg University, named for the inventor of the printing press. In the small city of Mainz, just 30 miles southwest of Frankfurt, BioNTech announced that the vaccine they were developing in cooperation with Pfizer and Fosun was found to be more than 95% effective. A China-US-Europe cooperation, what could better embody the power of globalization? Behind such a great achievement is digital connectivity, the rapid flow of ideas and knowledge from around the world. Drug companies today rely on globally conducted trials and tests. Cross-border flows of vaccine and medical equipment is decisive in saving lives, and economic recovery will be massively influenced by the degree of globalization. The pandemic has severely tested existing supply chains. In China, what is known as dual circulation elegantly describes the challenge. 3 centers, Asia centered around China, the Americas centered around the US, and Europe centered around Germany, must each strike a balance to make its crucial supply lines resilient and efficient. A headline from the Financial Times which read, "If the past 40 years were about efficiency, the next 40 will be about resilience," overdid it, in my humble opinion. Efficiency will continue to matter. Research from S&P shows that getting this balance wrong could cost up to 1/3 of growth potential. Comprehensive economic recovery requires globalization to allow efficiencies to play out, the absence of which will lead to negative externalities, wasted resources, and ultimately a loss of wealth and even lives. Let us take a closer look at the trading of medical goods. In the early days of the pandemic, mask and respiratory shortages led to public outcry and demands to bring home manufacturing of critical medical products. But it's not that simple. Healthcare covers 5 categories: pharmaceuticals, personal protective equipment, medical devices, medical supplies, and blood. Each of these categories has a distinct supply chain, and the failure of any one can wreak havoc to the healthcare system. Let's, for the purpose of proving the point, stand together at the bedside of a COVID patient. Here is a picture of top exporters of COVID-19 goods. The leading exporter for protective garments and glasses is China. For masks with medical parts, it's Germany. For needles and monitoring devices, it's the US. For surgical gloves, it's Malaysia. 11 different countries share the top 3 positions for 11 different groups of medical products. How could these products be manufactured by each country on its own in a world-class quality and at a reasonable price? Not surprisingly, trade contributed to the fight against COVID-19. According to UNCTAD, the trade of medical products has increased by an average of more than 50% since April 2020. But certainly, reliability and resilience of supply chains will remain an issue. N95 masks are a good example why that will be the case. At the peak of the first wave, the US government indicated that 290 million masks were needed per month, while the production capacity in the US was only 80 million. Globalization had encouraged the adoption of lean production and just-in-time supply. That encouraged manufacturers to reduce inventories as much as possible in order to lower costs for inventory and operations. Hospitals and many governments adopted this just-in-time purchasing model. So it should not come as a surprise that the WHO announced in July that healthcare workers had accounted for more than 10% of global infections, a lack of N95 masks being the main contributor. The world realized how important it is to have a stable, resilient supply chain, as well as diversified sourcing patterns. As we all learn, Six Sigma events seem to have a habit of coming our way much more often than our simplistic risk model suggested. I encourage decision makers to reread the late Benoit Mandelbrot's Fractal Geometry of Nature. We have to rethink risk management in a globalized world, as it remains key for our well-being, literally and financially. To model risk in a globalized world is almost as much an art as it is science today. What Mandelbrot started is yet to be completed. What better to achieve it than through global cooperation? What we know for sure is that diversified supply chains will be de-risked, and so will stocking up. An international organization providing sufficient stockpile of critical equipment to be distributed according to predetermined rules is a long-term global task worth pursuing. Corona is first and foremost a humanitarian crisis. International organizations like the WHO have a right and duty to hold their ground, strengthen their authority, and developing international standards for the exchange of critical supplies during emergencies, preventing devastating resource shortages and gaps in capabilities. The story of BioNTech is the story of mobility of humans in a globalized world. When the vaccine's inventor was just 4 years old, his father came to Germany as a laborer to work in automotive manufacturing. He went to university in his adopted homeland and became one of the richest men in Germany. What applies to the COVID vaccine applies to all inventors, driving the world. Together, we are faster, stronger, live longer, and better lives. The coronavirus won't kill globalization. If it ever will be killed, it will be by negligence of us, taking it for granted. It's unfortunately the perfect boogeyman. In the East, 10 Southeast Asian countries, as well as China, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. It became the world's largest regional free trade agreement, encompassing nearly a third of the world's population and gross domestic product. It's not by coincidence that those countries that are coping well with the pandemic were also those countries that knew the best remedy for the kickstart. Let us not tire in pointing to the huge human benefits trade and globalization brings. In spring this year, I wrote for AFCA COVID-19 is a global crisis. Don't make it worse by making it a crisis of globalization. Globalization and supply chains will look different after the pandemic. We will see more globalized e-commerce. We will see cross-border digital services more than ever before. It will be a better normal, more digital, more sustainable, and more resilient. But globalization remains to be the road to prosperity. It will ultimately help us defeat this and whatever virus may come, as one day another one sure will. I wish you health, prosperity, and an insightful forum. Thank you very much.